So what is your favorite book of the Bible? Maybe this time or this night, no? The book that I would like to introduce to you, no, which is my favorite book for the night. It's the book of Esther. No? So what is the book of Esther all about? So they say, or they describe the book of Esther as a book of crisis. There's a lot of crisis in the book of Esther. The book does not mention also, no, or it does not explicitly mention about the word God or any reference related to the names of God. So there's no mention about that. No? You could not find that in the book. And if we could think of it, no, God is made, no, or is probably, no, made behind the scene of the book. No? But we could not also avoid, or we could not miss the idea that the hand of God, no, is the one that moves the different scenes in the book of Esther. The word Esther, no, is in Hebrew. No, her name was Hadassah, and I think Hadassah is a word related to a certain kind of tree called the myrtle tree. But she is also called Esther, meaning star. No? And Esther is the star of this book. Now, the book of Esther tells us also of different other characters. We will hear about the name of Mordecai. No? We will hear the name of King Xerxes, the title of a king. No? But he is also known by another name called Ahasuerus. And we have this evil character also in the book of Esther. His name was Haman. Haman is an Agagite. And again, these characters are playing in the book of Esther. Now, famous statements. No? So one encouraging statements. No? So like from a man. No? From the man in one of the characters in the book of Esther. His name was Mordecai. No? He was quoted to say, to Esther a statement like this. And he told Esther, no, do not think, no, for a moment that because you're in the palace, no, you will escape when all other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place. But you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this. So we will read that in Esther chapter 4. So powerful statements like that, no? That people are placed in a position and it does not come by chance. No? Now, we will also hear about famous quotation also, no, about a woman, no? And it's a very powerful statement in answer to the statement of Mordecai. No? Esther replied to Mordecai, no? Go and gather together, no, all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. No? My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go to see the king. And if I perish, then I perish. So again, these are powerful words also, no, of one of biblical characters in the Bible, a woman, no, that really puts their life at stake, no, and for the good of others. Again, no, that's the book of Esther. And in the chapters that we will be mentioning this evening, we will see a supernatural providence of God. Although God is not mentioned in this text, and it seems that God has been silent, no? Made silent in these chapters of Esther, but the supernatural providence of God is evidenced and is seen, no? in every angles and in every chapters of the book. Now, what is providence? Providence is, maybe, no, we can divide providence into two words, pro and maybe the word video. No? Providence pro and video. Pro would mean before, no? And video would probably mean to see. So before and the word to see, no? So pro video. No? And if we will combine the word, then providence is actually, no, to see in advance. And that's what we mean by providence. No? So only God can do that. No? So providence is somehow, no, quite different from miracles. Miracles are things that occur and happen, no? And we can see that there's a a thing, no, that is maybe, no, against the natural laws, like the miracle of the wine, no? When God changed water into wine. Is it possible? So that's a miracle. No? But providence is something like a little bit more different. It follows the natural course of things. No? But then we see the moving of God and how God changes the circumstance, no, by some magic, or if you can say that, no, there's a sudden shift of events, no, that cannot be explained, no, why it changes, and again, no, that's supernatural providence. No? It's not like miracle that there are, no, healing that occurs. There's certain provisions that just came about, no, like the feeding of the 5,000. So here in this book, we see a lot of those providence. And in the first 2 chapters of this book, no, we will see how it goes. No? And God, no, is always on time, no? as evidence in this book. Allow me to read, no, chapter 1 of the book of Esther. We will just take maybe, no, a brief part of chapter 1. And this is chapter 1. It speaks about, no, a certain gathering, no, in the kingdom of Persia. So Persia is the next empire, no, that take over the world. No? They took over the powerful Babylonians, and I think, no, the very first emperor of the Medes and the Persian Empire, no, was Cyrus. No? And as you know, Cyrus, no, as mentioned in the book of Daniel, in the book of in the previous chapters, no, he was introduced to some people, and he was able to hear, no, a certain prophecy, no, of Isaiah, that Cyrus is the one who is going to let the Jews go back, no, after 70 years of being exiled in Babylon. No? Cyrus, no, which is the first king of the Persian Empire, no, will allow the Jews to return to Israel, to Jerusalem. No? So I think around 48,000 of those Jews, no, returned. And that progression and that moving of God was still evidence in the book of Nehemiah, no, where Nehemiah brought another 2,000 of these people, 2,000 Jews back to Israel. And here, no, in the book of Esther, it's a different thing, no, where the nation of Israel was safeguarded, no, because of the life, no, of Esther. But let's read chapter 1. No? Now, these events happened in the days of King Xerxes, who reigned over 127 provinces, stretching from India to Ethiopia. No? So this is how vast is the Persian Empire at the time. At that time, Xerxes ruled his empire from his royal throne at the fortress of Susa. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet, no, for all his nobles and officials. He invited all the military officers of Persia and Media as well, the princes and nobles of the provinces. The celebration lasted for 180 days, so that's a 6-month celebration. It's a tremendous display of the opulent wealth of his empire and the pomp and splendor of his majesty. When it was all over, the king gave a banquet, no, for all the people, from the greatest to the least, who were in the fortress of Susa. It lasted for 7 days, and it was held, no, in the courtyard of the palace. The courtyard was beautifully decorated with white cotton curtains and blue hangings, which were fastened with white linen cords and purple ribbons to silver rings embedded in the marble pillars. Gold and silver, no, couches stood on the mosaic pavement of the porphyry, no, marble, mother of pearls, and other costly stones. No. Drinks were served in gold goblets, no, of many designs, and there was an abundance of royal wine, reflecting the king's generosity. By edict of the king, no limits were placed, no, on the drinking, for the king had instructed all his palace officials to serve each man as much as he wanted. At the same time, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women, of the royal palace of King Xerxes. Now, in this portion of chapter 1, we see that there's 180 days of celebration, and there were two sets of gathering. One for Vashti, Queen Vashti, which is the wife of Xerxes at the time, and there's another gathering of King Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, where he gathers military officials. I think now some accounts, or maybe some historians, would say that this gathering of Xerxes was intended to influence the 127 princes of the other provinces to join him in his plan to battle with Greece. I think at this very point in time, the Greeks is rising up as a new and strong nation that is about to maybe challenge Persia, the dominance of Persia. I think at this time Alexander is already at the thrones of power, and again poses a challenge. And again, that nation of the Greeks is in the scene. And again, that's how the hand of God is moving, changing the course of history, bringing the exiles from Babylon back to Israel, and preparing the time for the birthing of the coming King, which is Jesus Christ. Now, why does it have to change? Why does it have to change there must be a shift in the course of history? The Greeks has to come in, because after the time of the Persians and the Greeks came in to power, they've given the way to make better roads, introduce a better language, or the best language as they say it, which is the Greek language. The Greek language is used in almost all of our New Testament, and that's the perfect, I think, way to interpret the Bible, because its words are precise. And again, in the world stage now, we see how God is moving from one empire to the other. And again, in this very first chapter, we see that Cyrus, or that Xerxes, which is the king, tried to influence his idea of this military personnel of his entire empire by inviting him to 180 days of feasting. And if you would realize that there was this battle of Thermopylae. In chapter 2, it seems that from chapter 1 to chapter 2, there's a brief pause there, because the battle of Thermopylae happened. And when chapter 2 entered, the Persian Empire actually was already defeated, and the defeat of the Persians, no, made the King Xerxes realize of his actions in chapter 1. So if you read chapter 1 of Esther, you'll see that God, no, has changed the course of history, and allowed Esther not to sit in power, and prepares her, no, for the coming crisis, and use her, no, as part of the provisions of God, no, to meet, no, the crisis that the Jews encountered. So again, no, how is the queen, no, was able to be deposed, no, uh, through this course of events, is again, no, because of how God, no, changes the course of history. So again, no, chapter 1 is a picture, no, of uh, the 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 power and opulence of Persia, but it became no match, no, when the Greeks entered the scene, and it was already predicted that the Greeks will take over the world. So again, no, the first battle probably that the Persians were defeated, no, was again, no, that battle of Thermopylae, no, where they encountered some 300 Greeks, and they were defeated in that battle. So again, no, is God late? Is God delayed, no, in meeting our needs? And we would usually say, you know, that Lord, if you were here last week, no, you would have met my need. Was God late? Did he delay, no, and was not present at the time of your need? No? Again, no, in this book, we will see that God is never late. He answers the crisis at the right moment. Okay, so again, no, the supernatural moving of God, no, when God changed and deposed the queen, no, and Esther came into power not because of probably, no, what she is, no, but there was a sudden shift, no, of events, no, that God alone can do. So God is the owner of this universe, no, not us.